Hello and welcome to another episode of Our Story, 250 Years of the United States of America. Today we will be continuing our coverage of the War of 1812, giving particular attention to two events, the bombardment of Fort McHenry, as well as the burning of Washington, D.C. There is a ton to get into, so let's get started. Welcome to 1814 in America. It's New Year's Day in the United States of America, and an anonymous soldier writes to James Madison providing his plan for how America may yet still take Canada. And his plan revolves around putting a bounty on successful capture rather than providing standard army pay for soldiers in the region. He writes to the president, "My plan is to employ officers and soldiers in addition to the regular establishment to reduce the Canades by job. Pray do not smile at the uncouth expression. The officers and men to receive a bountiful sum the moment the American banners shall wave in triumph on the ramparts of Quebec, and receive nothing till that event shall take place. My acquaintance with the people, sir, of the northern states justifies my confidence in the assertion that, in general, they will not fight so heartily by the month or year as they will by the job, they being accustomed to job work in their private occupations, and will universally turn out to take the Canades by job. The most simple ideas often prove to be the wisest. Sir, pardon me my zeal if it seems inflated. It is the zeal of a Native American, whose first breath of American air implied the oath of allegiance to the country that gave him life. The present mode of conducting the war does not answer the expectation of the people on the northern frontiers. They feel proud of their independence and jealous of their liberty. I mean by this, not to speak disrespectfully of my government. I lay the blame on those who have not undertaken to execute the orders of government. The system which I propose will cost the nation but a trifle, unless it obtains its object. I might safely vouch for the people in the northern part of the Union, that every man capable of performing the duties of a soldier will cheerfully embark in this enterprise if he can be sure of being discharged when the great object of his enlistment is completed." It's an interesting plan, but the suggestion goes ignored at this very moment, and the frigid winter slows most battles as the stalemate in Canada continues. On March 19th, Winfield Scott, only 27 years old, rises to Brigadier General. His promotion reflects both his discipline and his promise as a commander. The United States is desperate for capable leaders, especially along the Canadian border, where the war remains undecided. Scott soon takes command of a brigade that will be central to the summer campaign on the Niagara. Now, we've got to backtrack a little for context on this next story. By 1812, internal hostilities engulfed the Creek Nation, dividing a once strong tribe into two stratified factions. The Lower Creek, who are generally pro-American, and the Upper Creek, who resist American interference with their traditional way of life. And by the summer of last year, the violence has grown from minor infighting amongst the Creeks to an all-out civil war. In August of last year, a force of about 700 Creek Indians destroyed Fort Mims in present-day Baldwin County, killing 250 American defenders and taking at least 100 captives, triggering the large-scale American involvement in the war, and eventually, the battle that we arrive at today, March 26th, when Major General Andrew Jackson and a contingent of 3,300 regulars, militiamen, Cherokees, and Lower Creek Indians camp 6 miles north of Horseshoe Bend. The Red Sticks, under direction of Chief Minowa, have fortified their village Tohopeka, located on the peninsula created by the Bend. The massive mud and log fortifications at the neck of this peninsula make a frontal assault on Tohopeka virtually impossible. In the morning, Jackson launches a two-pronged assault, knowing that he can't assault Tohopeka head-on. he divides his force, sending his second-in-command, General John Coffee, with 1,300 militiamen, Lower Creeks, and Cherokees on a wide flanking maneuver that crosses the Tallapoosa and surrounds the Red Sticks. Jackson begins firing artillery, though it's largely ineffective, while Coffee's men position themselves across from Tohopeka. Once organized, a small contingent swims across the river to steal the Red Sticks' canoes, and once the canoes are secured, Coffee orders Colonel Gideon Morgan's Cherokee Regiment to traverse the river and attack the town itself. Jackson, still bombarding the front of the fort, begins hearing the small arms fire and seeing smoke rising from Tohopeka, and knows that the plan has worked. Without hesitation, he orders the 39th United States Infantry, his most elite unit, to initiate a bayonet charge. Colonel John Williams leads the assault, accompanied by a young Sam Houston. From most accounts, as soon as the 39th scales the fortification, the violence turns from a battle into a slaughter. Women and children were not exempt from the carnage today, and nor were those fleeing. More than 200 Red Stick warriors were killed while swimming across the Tallapoosa. The Battle of Horseshoe Bend is obviously a disaster for the Red Sticks, with more than 800 of their 1,000 warriors killed. Even more significant, the Upper Creek Nation loses a substantial fighting force in the battle. And even Chief Minowa is wounded 7 times, but miraculously escapes after playing dead until nightfall, crawling into a canoe and floating away down the river. Following the defeat at Horseshoe Bend, the remaining warriors signed the Treaty of Fort Jackson, which ends hostilities and grants the United States some 20 million acres, virtually half of what is today Alabama. In Europe, on April 4th, Napoleon abdicates and is exiled to the island of Elba. With the French threat removed, at least for now, Great Britain finally has the freedom to redirect men and resources toward North America. Veterans hardened in years of continental war now prepare to cross the Atlantic and head to the United States. The War of 1812 is about to become a whole lot more dangerous. Reflecting the anxiety of the situation, Secretary of the Treasury Albert Gallatin says, "We should have to fight hereafter not for free trade and sailors' rights, not for the conquest of the Canadas, but for our national existence." At the same time, however, the British begin the process of repealing their policies of impressment and trade strangulation, with the war no longer necessitating these oppressive policies. Before we continue with stories from this year, in May, a signer of the Declaration, Robert Paine, passes away, so we'll briefly look into his life now. Robert Treat Paine was born in 1731 in Boston and finished Boston Latin School at the top of his class. Paine entered Harvard College at the age of 14 and became interested in science and electricity and clockmaking. Just as Paine was graduating college in 1749, his father lost his fortune, so the younger Paine is left to make his own way in life. In 1755, he commenced reading law with his relative Judge Samuel Willard in Lancaster, and while pursuing these legal studies, preached at Shirley. When Willard was appointed colonel for the Crown Point expedition during the French and Indian War, Robert Paine served as chaplain of the regiment and encamped at Lake George for 3 months at the end of 55. In 57, Paine was admitted to the Massachusetts bar, the same month that his father died, and in 61, Paine moved to Taunton, Massachusetts, where he almost immediately became a leading citizen, a justice of the peace in 63, and a barrister in 64. Paine's dedication to the patriot cause began as early as 66, when he celebrated the repeal of the Stamp Act. In 68, he served as Taunton's delegate at the provincial convention held in Boston to discuss the landing of British troops in Boston, and despite the governor's efforts to prohibit such a meeting, the delegates remained for several days, discussing their grievances with the provincial government. Only 2 years after this historic meeting, events in Boston ignited the passions of colonists in what became known as the Boston Massacre. The trial pitted two future signers of the Declaration of Independence against each other in court. John Adams, who led the defense, against Payne, who led the prosecution of the soldiers. During the trial, Payne expressed the opinion that the core issue was whether the British Parliament could legally quarter an army in a town without its consent, which the Quartering Act of 1765 mandated. After the trial, Robert Treat Paine became even more involved in the Patriot cause. In 74, Paine attended the First Continental Congress, voted for by members of the Massachusetts General Court, after he maneuvered the absence of a Loyalist committee member, his neighbor, who otherwise would have tipped off the governor, and there he was among the members who were hesitant to cut ties entirely with their mother country and hoped that the formation of the Second Continental Congress would show the British a united colonial front, thereby leading them to negotiate. Paine was a vocal and involved member of the Continental Congress, which it's said is why Benjamin Rush nicknamed him the Objection Maker, because, according to Rush, Paine seldom proposed anything, but opposed nearly every measure that was proposed by other people. In the days leading up to the vote he cast for independence on July 4th, Paine wrote in his very succinct diary, July 1st, fine showers. July 2nd, rained hard, cooled the air much. July 3rd, cool day. July 4th, cool. The independence of the states voted and declared. He was much more expressive, however, in a letter to his friend Joseph Palmer, in which he wrote, "The day before yesterday, the Declaration of American Independency was voted by 12 colonies agreeable to the sense of the constituents, and New York was silent till their new convention, which sits next week, express their assent, of which we have some doubt. Thus the issue is joined, and it is our comfortable reflection that if by struggling we can avoid the servile subjection which Britain demanded, we remain a free and happy people. But if, through the frowns of Providence we sink in the struggle, we do but remain the wretched people we should have been without this declaration. Our hearts are full, our hands are full. May God, in whom we trust, support us." Robert Paine became Massachusetts' first Attorney General and served from 77 to 1790. In 83, he prosecuted the criminal case of Commonwealth v. Jennison, which was pivotal in abolishing slavery outright in Massachusetts, the first state to do so, and accepted his friend Governor John Hancock's offer for an associate justiceship on the state Supreme Court in 1790, serving there until his retirement in 1804. Paine enjoyed his peaceful retirement for a decade, which brings us to today, where he dies, and despite all the traveling he did in his life, he is buried just 2 short blocks from his birthplace. Now, the next major advancement in the war finds us here on July 3rd, where American forces under Major General Jacob Brown cross the Niagara River and seize Fort Erie. The capture secures a foothold in Upper Canada and gives the United States troops a base for further advancement. Just 2 days later, on July 5th, Brown's army meets the British at the Battle of Chippewa, and here Winfield Scott's disciplined brigade proves its worth, standing firm in an open field of combat and driving back British regulars. This victory boosts American morale and demonstrates that the United States troops, at least when properly trained, can match even the best of the British Army. Later in the month, on the 22nd, the Treaty of Greenville is signed, resolving certain disputes with Indian nations in the Old Northwest, the Wyandots, Delawares, Senecas, and Miamis. The goal of the treaty was to solidify the tribes' support for the United States against Britain, and in return places these tribes under the protection of the United States. Back in Niagara, Brown's campaign reaches its climax, and both sides claim honor in a bloody battle, but neither holds a clear advantage, and Brown's exhausted army soon falls back to Fort Erie. Now, even as the fighting continues, diplomats look to open up channels of communication. On August 8th, peace negotiations formally begin in Ghent, Belgium, though both the United States and the British remain far from an agreement. Even while these talks have started, the war in the East only grows. On August 9th, British warships open fire on the coastal town of Stonington, Connecticut, and for 4 days the townspeople endure the bombardment while the local militia does their best to resist. They prove to put up a good fight, and on August 12th, the British withdraw, having inflicted some damage but failing to subdue the community. Meanwhile, the promised reinforcements from Europe arrive, and on August 14th, Major General Robert Ross disembarks at the Chesapeake with 4,500 men. These troops are experienced from the Peninsular War and are immediately ready to strike. On August 19th, Ross lands his men at Benedict, Maryland, and begins the march inland. Americans scramble to respond, but on the 24th of August, the two forces meet at Bladensburg, just outside of the city of Washington, and poorly coordinated United States militia lines collapse before the British advance, opening the way to the capital. And that night, British troops enter the city of Washington and begin setting fire to public buildings in a devastating blow, one intended as retribution for the American burning of the Canadian capital of York, which we mentioned last year. Now, the British and Canadian soldiers have virtually unfettered access to the capital, and as they begin to burn the city, government officials are forced to flee. So let's cut to some stories of those on the ground. Famously, we have a detailed account from First Lady Dolly Madison, who writes of the event to her sister. My husband left me yesterday morning to join General Winder. He inquired anxiously whether I had courage or firmness to remain in the president's house until his return, on the morrow or succeeding day, and on my assurance that I had no fear but for him and the success of our army, he left me, beseeching me to take care of myself and of the cabinet papers, public and private. I have since received 2 dispatches from him, written with a pencil. The last is alarming because he desires I should be ready at a moment's warning to enter my carriage and leave the city, that the enemy seemed stronger than had been reported, and that it might happen that they would reach the city with intention to destroy it. I am accordingly ready. I have pressed as many cabinet papers into trunks as to fill one carriage. Our private property must be sacrificed, as it is impossible to procure wagons for its transportation. I am determined not to go myself until I see Mr. Madison safe and he can accompany me, as I hear of much hostility towards him. Disaffection stalks around us. My friends and acquaintances are all gone. Even Colonel C. with his 100 men who were stationed as a guard in the enclosure. French John, a faithful domestic, with his usual activity and resolution, offers to spike the cannon at the gate and to lay a train of gunpowder which would blow up the British should they enter the house. To the last proposition I positively object, without being able, however, to make him understand why all advantages in war may not be taken. Wednesday morning, 12 o'clock. Since sunrise, I have been turning my spyglass in every direction and watching with unwearied anxiety, hoping to discern the approach of my dear husband and his friends, but alas, I can descry only groups of military wandering in all directions, as if there was a lack of arms or of spirit to fight for their own firesides. 3 o'clock. Will you believe it, my sister? We have had a battle or skirmish near Bladensburg, and I am still here within sound of the cannon. Mr. Madison comes not. May God protect him. 2 messengers, covered with dust, come to bid me fly, but I wait for him. At this late hour, a wagon has been procured. I have had it filled with the plate and most valuable portable articles belonging to the house. Whether it will reach its destination, the Bank of Maryland, or fall into the hands of British soldiery, events must determine. Our kind friend, Mr. Carroll, has come to hasten my departure. and is in a very bad humor with me because I insist on waiting until the large picture of General Washington is secured, and it requires to be unscrewed from the wall. This process was found too tedious for these perilous moments. I have ordered the frame to be broken and the canvas taken out. It is done, and the precious portrait placed in the hands of 2 gentlemen of New York for safekeeping. And now, dear sister, I must leave this house, or the retreating army will make me a prisoner in it, by filling up the road I am directed to take. When I shall again write you, or where I shall be tomorrow, I cannot tell. That portrait of Washington that Mrs. Madison writes about saving is in fact the portrait we discussed back in 1796. Now, to hear another perspective, Captain Harry Smith, the junior adjunct to Major General Robert Ross, also writes the following account from the British side. We entered Washington for the barbarous purpose of destroying the city. Admiral Cockburn would have burnt the whole place, but Ross would only consent to the burning of public buildings. I had no objection to burn arsenals, dockyards, frigates, buildings, stores, barracks, etc., but well do I recollect that, fresh from the Duke's humane warfare in the south of France, we horrified at the order to burn the elegant houses of Parliament and the President's house. In the latter, however, we found a supper, all ready, which was sufficiently cooked without more fire, and which many of us speedily consumed, unaided by the fiery elements, and drank some very good wine also. I shall never forget the destructive majesty of the flames as the torches were applied to the beds, curtains, etc. Our sailors were artists at the work. Thus was fought the Battle of Bladensburg, which wrested from the Americans their capital, Washington, and burnt its capital and other buildings with the ruthless firebrand of red savages of the woods. Neither our admirals or the government at home were satisfied that we had not allowed the work of destruction to progress, as it was considered the total annihilation of Washington would have removed the seat of government to New York, and the northern and federal states were adverse to the war with England. In the final days of August of 1814, the British tightened their grip on the Chesapeake. On the 27th, American defenders abandoned Fort Warburton, a small but strategic position on the Potomac River south of Washington. Lacking the means to hold out against the advancing British warships, the Americans retreat, and the fall of the fort leaves the river open to the enemy, which sails upstream. The next day, August 28th, British forces turn their attention to Alexandria, Virginia, and the town, which is just across from the capital, cannot successfully resist the ships now dominating the Potomac. Under the threat of bombardment, Alexandria surrenders without a fight, and the British seize stores of flour, tobacco, and goods, striking another blow at American supply as well as morale. The focus of the war shifts to the north, and on September 11th, the British launch a major offensive against New York. Their army marches south from Canada, while their fleet sails into Lake Champlain, aiming to cut New England off from the rest of the Republic. At the Battle of Plattsburgh, American regulars, militia, and sailors stand in their path. The naval clash on the lake proves to be decisive. The United States gunboats are able to outmaneuver and defeat the larger British squadron, and deprived of support, the British Army withdraws back into Canada. We now get to one of the more famous stories from the entirety of the War of 1812. Fort McHenry, a large star fortress built in the year 1800, guards Baltimore's inner harbor at a bend in the Patapsco River. The British plan is to land troops on the eastern side of the city while the Navy reduces the fort, allowing for naval support of the ground troops when they attack the city's defenders. The British land their combined force of soldiers, sailors, and Royal Marines at North Point, a peninsula at the fork of the Patapsco River in the Chesapeake Bay. And after landing unopposed this September the 12th, they advance toward Baltimore. The Maryland militia commander, Major General Samuel Smith, orders Brigadier General John Stricker to delay the advance by provoking an engagement. Around midday, while the British are stopping for a meal, Stricker orders 250 riflemen and cannon to draw the British toward his forces. Ross, hearing the skirmishing, rides forward to assess the situation. While ordering his men to drive off the American riflemen, Ross is shot in the chest and dies a few hours later. So command of the land force chaotically passes to Colonel Arthur Brooke. Brooke collects the main body of the British troops and presses forward. Around 3 p.m., he attacks the American positions, and the American defenders hold, at least initially, inflicting heavy casualties and resorting to firing scrap metal from their cannon because of the lack of real ammunition. Despite this initial defense, the Americans begin to give way to the British regulars and withdraw to Baltimore. And following this, Brooke halts for the rest of the day to consolidate his forces, the delay giving the American defenders in Baltimore time to prepare their defense. On September 13th, the Americans assemble some 10,000 men and 100 cannons along the Philadelphia Road, blocking the British advance toward Baltimore, a far stronger defense than the British expect. They're outnumbered 2-1, so that naval support will be required to dislodge the American forces, and Fort McHenry will have to be eliminated. The 1,000 Americans at Fort McHenry are commanded by Major General Armistead, and in the early morning, British warships begin their bombardment. The shallow water prohibits the use of the heavy warships, and so instead they attack with bomb vessels, and there's a little bit of comedy in the way that these are named, because it's the HMS Terror, Volcano, Meteor, Devastation, and Etna. Now these ships fire exploding mortar shells at high angles into the fort, and joining them is the rocket ship HMS Erebus, which launches the newly invented Congreve rockets. Real quick, these rockets were only just invented in 1808 by British inventor Sir William Congreve, and the body of these rockets is made from sheet iron, and they're propelled by modified gunpowder. As they burn, the rockets are known to emit a spectacular red glow, but they're also known, at least for now, to be massively inaccurate. Initially, the British fleet exchanges fire with the fort's cannon, but soon has to withdraw out of range. For the next 27 hours, in driving rain, the warships hammer the fort. More than 15,000 cannonballs, shells, and rockets are fired, but they only inflict light damage thanks to the fortification efforts completed before the battle. On the morning of September 14th, the American defenders lower their battered storm flag and raise a large 30 by 42-foot garrison flag that Major Armistead ordered a year earlier from local flag maker Mary Pickersgill. This garrison flag is raised every morning, but on this day, September 14th, it has a special significance. The failed bombardment of Fort McHenry forces Brooke to abandon the land assault on Baltimore, and the British set sail for New Orleans. An American lawyer, Francis Scott Key, is being held on a British warship for prisoner negotiation during this siege and serves as a witness for the event. He feared that the fort had succumbed to the bombardment, but when he sees the large flag flying over the fort on this morning, he knows that the fort held through the night. As he later tells his brother-in-law, Roger Brooke Taney, the relief and the awe that he feels in this moment inspires him to quickly jot down some thoughts in the fervor of the moment. Now, he and his party are released on September 16th, and Key makes his way to Baltimore and stays at the Indian Queen Hotel, where he finds a bed for the night and in his room compiles all his notes and finishes writing out 4 verses. These lyrics initially have no name, but one is soon given to him by a friend. This poem is to be called The Defense of Fort McHenry. The Baltimore Patriot and Evening Advertiser publishes the poem under the name Defense of Fort McHenry and says, The following beautiful and animating effusion, which is destined long to outlast the occasion and outlive the impulse which produced it, has already been extensively circulated. In our first renewal of publication, we rejoice in an opportunity to enliven the sketch of an exploit so illustrious, with strains which so fitly celebrate it. The annexed song was composed under the following circumstances. A gentleman had left Baltimore in a flag of truce for the purpose of getting released from the British fleet a friend of his who had been captured at Marlborough. He went so far as the mouth of the Patuxent and was not permitted to return lest the intended attack on Baltimore should be disclosed. He was therefore brought up the bay to the mouth of the Patapsco, where the flag vessel was kept under the guns of a frigate, and he was compelled to witness the bombardment of Fort McHenry, which the admiral had boasted that he carry in a few hours, and that the city must fall. He watched the flag at the fort through the whole day with anxiety that can be better felt than described, until the night prevented him from seeing it. In the night he watched the bomb shells, and at early dawn his eye was again greeted by the proudly waving flag of his country. Now, a part that was news to me when I learned it, below this text it is specified that the poem be read to the tune Anacreon in Heaven, which sounds like this.
Where he sat in full glee, a few songs of harmony sent a petition that he their inspired and patron would be. When this answer arrived from the jolly old Grecian, voice, fiddle, and flute no longer be mute. I'll lend you my aid and inspire you to boot. And besides, I'll instruct you like me to entwine the myrtle of Venus with Bacchus's vine.
The poem, as it's first published, reads, "O say, can you see, by the dawn's early light, what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars, through the perilous flight, o'er the ramparts we watched, were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. O say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? On the shore dimly seen, through the mists of the deep, where the foe's haughty host in dread silence reposes. What is that which the breeze, o'er the towering steep, as it fitfully blows, half conceals, half discloses? Now it catches the gleam of the morning's first beam, in full glory reflected, now shines in the stream. 'Tis the star-spangled banner, O long may it wave, o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. And where is that band who so vauntingly swore that the havoc of war and the battle's confusion, a home and a country, should leave us no more? Their blood has washed out their foul footsteps' pollution. No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. And the star-spangled banner in triumph doth wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. Oh, thus be it ever, when freemen shall stand between their loved home and the war's desolation. Blessed with victory and peace, may the heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must, when our cause it is just, and this be our motto, in God we trust. And the star-spangled banner in triumph shall wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave." Okay, now, on November 6th, the Battle of Malcolm's Mills takes place in Upper Canada. American mounted forces ride into the interior, striking at a Canadian militia and destroying supplies. It is the last significant land battle fought on Canadian soil during the war, marking the fading hopes of a U.S. invasion. The war again draws our attention to the South, where on November 9th, Andrew Jackson leads U.S. troops against British-backed Spanish positions at Pensacola in Spanish Florida. Though Spain is officially neutral, the British have used the port as a staging ground. Jackson storms the town, forcing the British to evacuate and eliminating a potential base of operations on the Gulf Coast. The action sets the stage for the larger confrontation that soon looms at New Orleans, which we'll cover in detail next year as it's one of the most iconic battles of the war and spurs a well-loved song of its own. Now, on the 23rd of November, Elbridge Gerry, the current Vice President of the United States and one of 56 signers of the Declaration, suffers a heart attack while visiting Joseph Norris of the Treasury Department, and soon after returning to his home, passes away. As we discussed in 1812, there is no mechanism for replacing a vice president, so America operates without the role filled for over 2 years, until the next election will determine who is to take up the office and the new VP will be sworn in. In D.C., Congress votes to pay for his burial expenses, but the partisan House rejects a Senate bill providing the vice president's salary to be paid to his widow for the remainder of his term. So before we continue this year's story, let's take a look into Elbridge Gerry's life. He was born in 1744 in Massachusetts, and little is known of the childhood of Elbridge Gerry. We do know that he entered Harvard College at the age of 14 and graduated in 1762, then went on to receive a master's degree in 1765 at the age of 20. His master's dissertation argued that America should resist the recently passed Stamp Act. Upon graduation, Elbridge entered his father's counting house. The Gerrys owned their own vessels and shipped dried codfish to Barbados and Spanish ports and returned with bills of exchange and goods. He eventually became one of the wealthiest and most enterprising merchants in Marblehead. Gerry's first venture into politics occurred in 1770, when he served on a local committee to enforce the ban on the sale and consumption of tea. In December of 71, his father, Thomas Gerry, moderated a meeting in Marblehead of the new Committee of Correspondence to discuss the resolves put forward by Samuel Adams. Elbridge joined his father and helped craft the fiery resolves that were adopted. In May of 72, Elbridge was elected representative to the General Court and first met Sam Adams there, with whom he immediately bonded. When Parliament closed the port of Boston in June of 74, Marblehead became a major port of entry for goods and supplies, which Gerry then transported to Boston. Also in 74, Gerry was appointed to the Provincial Congress, where he was appointed to the Executive Committee of Safety. On the famous night of April 18th, 1775, when Paul Revere rode into history and poetry, Gerry and 2 American colonels were staying at a tavern after a meeting from the Committee of Safety. The tavern was on the road which the British took to Lexington, and when a detachment of redcoats stopped to search the house, Gerry and his companions escaped in their nightclothes and hid in a nearby cornfield. Now, during the remainder of 75, Gerry stayed in Boston, helping to raise troops and supplies for the Provincial Army. Gerry submitted a proposal in the Provincial Congress for a law to encourage the fitting out of armed vessels and to provide for the adjudication of prizes. For a colony to authorize such an act was obviously rebellious, if not treasonable. John Adams pronounced this law one of the most important measures of the Revolution, however, as under its provisions, Massachusetts vessels captured several British ships, procuring cargoes and supplies needed by the colonies. Elbridge Gerry was elected a delegate to the Second Continental Congress and took his seat there in February of 76, and Gerry's efforts to persuade delegates from the middle colonies to support independence earned praise from John Adams, who said, "If every man here was a Gerry, the liberties of America would be safe against the gates of earth and hell." Gerry voted for independence on July 2nd and signed the engrossed copy of the Declaration on September 3rd. Gerry was re-elected to Congress in 77 and signed the Articles of Confederation, and remained in Congress, technically speaking, until 85. However, in 80, he was offended by actions that he felt impinged on states' rights and withdrew from Congress. He resumed the seat 3 years later, but overall, during his time in Congress, he earned the nickname Soldier's Friend for his advocacy of better pay and equipment, and was recognized as a diligent legislator. After leaving Congress, Elbridge Gerry married Ann Thompson on July 12th of 86, and they had 9 children. Also in 86, Gerry took his seat in the Massachusetts House of Representatives, and in 87 he attended the Federal Convention in Philadelphia that produced the new Constitution of the United States. At first, he advocated for a strong central national government, but then changed his mind as the form of the Constitution developed. He believed that both the executive and legislative branches of government were granted too ambiguous and dangerous powers, and he refused to sign the Constitution, going so far as to publish his anti-federalist writings. After overcoming his objections to the Constitution, Gerry served in the House of Representatives from 89 to 93, and to the dismay of his anti-federalist friends, he supported the Federalist agenda, including Hamilton's proposals to fund the war debt and establish a national bank. In 97, President John Adams sent Gerry, along with Charles Pinckney and John Marshall, to France to negotiate a peace treaty with Talleyrand, but the mission was a disaster and came to be known as the XYZ Affair, which we covered in detail. In 1810, Gerry ran as a Democratic-Republican candidate and was elected governor of Massachusetts, going on to be re-elected in 1811, but defeated in 1812. We covered the reason why in our 1812 episode, as he had become synonymous with the redistricting bill that gained him lasting fame. He was invited to run as vice president just 2 weeks after being defeated in this gubernatorial election. And that pretty much catches us up to today. Now, back to our story about 1814. As the war drags on into its 3rd year, discontent grows the strongest in New England. Trade has withered under British blockade, and coastal towns live under constant threat of raids. Many Federalists who have long been opposed to this war call it Mr. Madison's War, and view it as a reckless conflict that sacrifices commerce and security. Late into 1814, their frustration reaches a breaking point. In mid-December, delegates from Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island gather at Hartford, joined by representatives from Vermont and New Hampshire. Their goal is to coordinate a regional response to the war and the policies of the Republican administration. The Hartford Convention meets in secrecy, fueling the suspicion and rumors, and to outsiders it appears that this group might be considering secession or to negotiate a separate peace with Britain. Inside, the debates are actually far more cautious, but no less serious. The delegates draft a series of proposals. They call for constitutional amendments to limit the power of the federal government, restricting embargoes, requiring a 2/3 vote of Congress to declare war, to admit new states, or to impose trade restrictions, and they look to prevent presidents from serving successive terms, full stop, and from coming from the same state consecutively. These measures reflect New England's fear of being dominated by the growing power of the South and West, but the talks prove not to lead to any real action, especially because on December 24th, the Treaty of Ghent is signed and peace is agreed upon. Now, the terms of the peace are status quo ante bellum, or the way things were before the war. All land reverts back to its original owners, British agents stop supporting Indian raiders, and as we've mentioned, Britain has already repealed its trade restrictions and impressment policies. America has once again fought its old master, this time to a draw, and Britain has avoided disaster in North America while defeating the French in Europe. Canada gains a proud military heritage from the war, and somewhat paradoxically, relations between the United States and Great Britain actually improve. The Indians, however, are the worst losers of the war. Not for lack of trying, of course. Many men fought valiantly and had hoped that Great Britain would continue to insist upon a recognized Indian nation in North America as part of the peace deal, but the British quickly abandoned the claim during peace negotiations. Without British money and weaponry flowing to them, the Indians lose the ability to defend their lands and attack United States settlements, increasing the rate of westward expansion by America. Now, just because the treaty is signed does not mean that the fighting is over. News is slow to move, so fighting will continue for a few months yet, and to begin a story that we'll complete tomorrow, the British land in New Orleans by the end of the year. When he receives word of the landing, Andrew Jackson boldly marches out to meet the enemy, and in a daring nighttime assault, the Americans strike the British camp. A sharp but inconclusive fight ensues, and after several hours, Jackson disengages and withdraws 2 miles north to the Rodriguez Canal. The Americans immediately begin construction on an earthwork, later known as Line Jackson. It runs perpendicular from the Mississippi River for about 3/4 of a mile to a cypress swamp. A marine battery is established on the right bank of the river, and on Christmas Day, General Sir Edward Packingham arrives and assumes command of the British Expeditionary Force. Annoyed by his subordinates' inability to defeat Jackson and capture New Orleans, Packingham moves his army to the Chalmette Plantation, which is about 5 miles southeast of New Orleans. Through to the end of the year, Packingham makes 2 attempts to breach Line Jackson. Both are repulsed by the Americans, and left with few options, Packingham sets his sights on a major assault, but we'll cover that tomorrow. That pretty much does it for the year. Thank you so much for looking through 1814 with me. It's an awesome year, so many iconic moments, and in tomorrow's episode, we wrap up the War of 1812 for good. Just want to take a moment to say thanks to all you listening on YouTube. I really only uploaded there as kind of a secondary place for people to find the show, because I assumed with it not having any visuals that most people would choose to listen to it on their default music players, but getting a lot of support there, so thank y'all for listening. If I had more time on my hands and didn't have to also work a full-time job, I would absolutely be including graphics for all these videos, but once this project is done, that is the goal, to hopefully be able to turn this into something that I do more seriously, but it will take all y'all's support in order to make that happen. So follow the show wherever you can, give us a review if possible on the platform that you're listening to this on, and give us a comment, tell me what you're liking, what we got wrong, what we got right, what you learned, anything you want to say, go ahead and leave that in the comments. Besides that, you can reach out on X if you've got something to say at 250 Years of USA. Or if you don't have an X and you want to get in contact with a longer message, go ahead and send an email to 250yearsofusa@gmail.com. This really is a passion project for me. I wanted to expand my growth and understanding of American history in time for our 250th anniversary, and there's so much to learn that going through it linearly just kind of made sense to the way that my brain works, and I'm happy to see that for other people, this is kind of a neat little daily American devotional. Always something new to learn, but that's enough of a wrap up from me. We're going to keep going, like I said, 1815 tomorrow, and then on to some peacetime stories, which are really cool because we can focus more on inventions and political changes and things like that. This has been our story 250 years of the United States of America, and as always, thanks for listening.